Right, thank you. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, and including the press if they are watching, or the public who may be watching on the website. Have we any apologies? We've got an issue with, I know, two co-opted members who can't connect, and we're trying to resolve that for the future. Any other apologies? No. The minutes of the last meeting, which we met in July, are they accepted? Anybody opposed to them? Voice your comment, please. No. Can I assume that they are accepted? I don't think we've got any urgent items, have we, Lynn?
No.
So we are down to climate change. And has Glyn turned up yet?
Hiya, good morning. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, I don't know. The new role has made him. Well, welcome, Glyn. And first of all, can I just highlight and congratulate you on your new post as Director of Communities, Environment and Climate Change. I did notice a letter in the Wakefield Express last week, actually from one of my own constituents, saying, why do we need another director? But in fact, there was a vacancy. Glyn has been successful, and as you can see just from his title, it's far wider than climate change. It's a big department, isn't it, Glyn?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and heartiest congratulations. You really deserve it.
Thank you so much.
And we also welcome Peter Leighton-Jones, who's a Senior Climate Change Manager, and he's also relatively newly appointed now and is attending this committee for the first time. And so we want you to bring us up to date on the action plan, the new climate change team, and the impact of COVID-19. So carry on.
Okay, good morning everybody, and thanks very much for that, Olivia. I'm going to let Peter come in shortly in terms of, and I think he's going to bring a presentation up just to show us show progress, but just to give some context in terms of where we are. The last time I certainly met you, we did talk a lot around that we were basically pulling together a new team, which is now in place. So we have a team of 6 people, and Peter is the lead officer on that team. So he will shortly be able to tell you about his new team and very exciting individuals who are helping us to deliver our targets. The report that we're going to talk about today did come to Cabinet on the 15th of September last week. We have been doing a huge amount of work, which hopefully we can get into talking to you through with it shortly with you, in terms of creating a very clear, sustainable, deliverable plan. There is some huge challenges in there, but we believe they're all deliverable. Obviously, the big challenge for us is, as we all know, is that the council set ourselves as 2030 to be carbon neutral. That's a challenge for us in terms of we've got to achieve 35,000 tonnes of carbon. I'll be able to remove that. There's obviously the bigger challenge for the council is around the whole district. Again, you'll see we are starting to engage, and now we're going to assist in delivering that, and that target, if you may recall, is around 2 million tonnes, which is a huge task. There's been no target set West Yorkshire level in terms of the district as target, but obviously it's something we're keen to look at trying to work with partners in many different ways. Pete will shortly give us a short presentation just in terms of the plan itself. We have focused on 6 work streams. 5 of the streams predominantly are focused on how we, the council, are going to comply. The 6th stream is how we're going to help in terms of the wider targets for the district, and certainly, it's something that's very much on our radar, but clearly initially want to put a lot of focus in terms of getting our carbon pledge by 2030. And that's what Pete will talk to you around shortly. But I think that's the intro, and probably Pete would give some more detail in terms of the plan. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll pass over to Pete, and then obviously any questions as we go along you can ask us.
Thank you, Glyn. I'm just trying to share my screen. I'm hoping that that's worked, if anyone can confirm.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my name's Peter Leighton Jones. I'm recently appointed to Wakefield Council. I've been here for 2 months now, I think it's a really exciting time with obviously the commitment that Wakefield is showing to this particular issue. And to give some background, some context regarding myself, I have kind of lived and breathed the sustainability movement from being quite young. At university, I did my degree in zoology and ecology because I've got an interest in the natural world. I then broadened that out into the sustainability realm because I realised that we needed to look at sustainable development if we were going to have any chance of protecting this planet that we live on. So I did a master's in sustainable business as well. But vocationally, I'm a chartered environmentalist. I'm also a member of various professional bodies dedicated to furthering this cause. And I've got 15 years of experience, direct experience in sustainable development related work, having worked in procurement and project management around low carbon initiatives during that time period, previously at Leeds City Council. So I do have a local government background. We've also put together a highly skilled team, as Glyn has said. So we've got 2 project managers, one of whom has got a background in energy efficiency, a lot of stakeholder engagement related work around fuel poverty as well. So brings a lot of good skills around communication with the public to the fore. The other individual has got more of a commercial buildings background, which is going to be very important going forward because built assets and the need to make those more sustainable is going to be a crucial determinant of this plan's success. Recognising the importance of engagement and communication, we have a dedicated post for education and awareness, which again is going to be critical, not just internally, but externally as well. And we also have some administrative posts to help support the work that we do, because governance in particular is going to be absolutely crucial in terms of transparency and proving that we are making progress from a performance perspective. Both to members and members of the public, elected members and members of the public. Obviously, Glyn has got a new corporate director role where climate change is specifically referenced, which I think is a really important step in the right direction. And I think it's relatively unique in terms of local government. So I think that's to be lauded. The deputy leader's portfolio is also climate change. And I think strategically, we have a really good structure in place now to help drive forward these initiatives. So we've got the top-down approach, and now it's about focusing the bottom-up approach to meet that in the middle and actually deliver schemes that we need to deliver. So hopefully that gives an overview of where we're at with the team. In terms of the climate change action plan, that was a requirement falling out of the fact that the council had declared a climate change emergency, which was in May 2019. So this action plan gives us our programme of work and our licence to operate effectively, and that was approved at Cabinet last week on the 15th. And I think it's going to be a very changeable document. It's going to be dynamic to reflect the fact that things will change, new technologies will come on board. We might experiment in certain areas and find that it's not as effective as it needs to be in terms of those carbon reductions that we need to make. But I think it provides a good starting point, and it covers all of the bases. So just to give you, well, before I give you a synopsis of the action plan itself, Glyn has already referred to the fact that we need to save 35,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent in terms of our organisational emissions to reach net zero by 2030. And there's obviously the wider challenge of the district, which is 2 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent, depending on what you include in scope. So I'll just go to the next slide, which covers the work streams. So Glyn has alluded to the fact that there are 6 work streams that we have broken down our workload into specific themes to tackle. So the first one is low carbon estate. So that's looking at our own buildings and assets that we own. And a large part of that will be around energy efficiency. So energy conservation measures, some of them will be relatively simple things like LED conversions, better building management system controls. and looking at ventilation systems. But then we might have to do deeper retrofits to look at the way we heat buildings, because obviously there's a reliance on gas in any building really to do space and water heating. So looking at things, more innovative ways of doing that, potentially around district heat networks, but also ground source and air source heat pumps as well. And then where we do need to build new assets, making sure that they're built to the highest sustainability standards, so we can lead by example in that area. The second work stream is about low carbon fleet, so transitioning towards ultra low emission vehicles. A lot of good work has already been done, but we now need to strengthen it and expand that as opportunities arise around those replacement cycles for vehicles. Some vehicle classes are easier to treat in terms of converting to fully electric equivalents. Some classes are harder to treat, such as refuse collection vehicles, but we are looking into various strategies wherein we can address that. So we have anaerobic digesters in the district where we could create biomethane that could be used to fuel some of those vehicles. Alternatively, fully EV versions are rising in prominence and becoming more cost effective as time goes on. So we're looking at opportunities there. And in the medium to longer term, hydrogen still has obviously a lot of potential that needs to be explored, and we will do that at the correct juncture. The third work stream is about renewable energy and having an aspiration to self-generate, because about 70% of our emissions baseline resides within the electricity that we buy, which is used to supply our buildings. So obviously that is the most important area that we need to address. So we do own quite a lot of land, so it's looking for opportunities where we could potentially implement energy parks, potentially with a focus on solar, but making sure that anything we do adds to the aesthetics of the local area and has a positive impact in terms of enhancing biodiversity, for example, and potentially raising additional funds that can be used for community environmental projects as well. We also recognise that there will be some residual emissions, which we haven't been able to treat by 2030 potentially. And in those scenarios, we would look to offset within the local area where we have control and we know that those offsets are genuine. So piggybacking on existing work to support the Northern Forest via the White Rose Forest Initiative. And again, making sure that we enhance biodiversity as part of any carbon offsetting work that we do. Then we've got a fifth work stream that's looking at behaviour change and influencing. So we want to become a carbon literate organisation. So our education and awareness officer has done some training to be able to deliver carbon literacy training across the organisation. And that will be starting towards the end of this year, with an initial focus on those priority areas in terms of the services that have the biggest impact from a climate change perspective and carbon perspective. We also need to look at some of our scope 3 indirect emissions that are within our control. For example, business travel. So making sure that we're incentivizing active travel where possible, but also public transportation as well. And where we do need to use vehicles, having pool cars that are EV, which is something that we're already doing. So like I said, training and awareness is going to be really important, but we also need to look at the decision-making frameworks that we have in place. The cabinet reports now have a section for climate change implications, but we also need to get involved in conversations at a much earlier stage than that to make sure that by the time we get to the point of writing that report, the content of the report and the recommendations are not just a formality. We will have actually embedded climate change considerations into the scheme of work that's been developed. A very important area will be procurement and our supply chain, because scope 3 emissions, the indirect emissions, do account for quite a high percentage of any organisation's emissions base, but it's notoriously difficult to quantify those emissions. But that doesn't detract from the importance of trying to make interventions in those areas. We will outsource a lot of what we need as an organisation to third parties. So we need to work with those third parties to maximise the opportunities and the outcomes when it comes to carbon reduction, and also wider sustainability-based initiatives as well. So we'll be looking at the procurement process to see what interventions we can make, obviously prioritising the most important areas initially, but we'll also be engaging with the existing supply chain where those contracts might run for a number of years from this point, to see if we can negotiate any better outcomes contractually when it comes to climate change. And then we also need to look at the lessons learned from COVID-19. 4 months ago, 5 months ago, we would have never imagined that we would be doing a meeting like this online. But what COVID-19 has shown us is it is possible to rely on technology and not travel as much for meetings and work. So I think there are some positives to take from that, the response to COVID-19, and we just need to make sure that we embed some of those changes, those new ways of working, to maximise the opportunities from a climate change perspective, and also from an air quality perspective, and just general quality of life in terms of reducing congestion and giving more time for families and so on and so forth. The sixth work stream is probably the most challenging, and it will probably evolve into multiple work streams in its own right. Initially, one of the most important things we need to do is engage in public consultation, and surveys will be getting released in the coming weeks to do just that. We need to canvass the views of members of the public. So there'll be a resident survey, but we also need to look at businesses as well and garner their views, because they'll have different challenges, and we need to reflect that in any plans going forward. And we also want to get feedback from school children as well, because they're the people that will be most affected by climate change potentially in the future. So there'll be a number of different routes in terms of trying to engage with members of the public and businesses. And we'll also be looking at focus groups, dedicated focus groups for certain key stakeholder groups, and more information will be provided in the coming weeks with regards to that. Sustainable lifestyles is definitely going to be something that we'll be looking at. So empowering people to better understand their carbon impacts and measure their carbon footprints, and then give practical advice to residents as to how they can make changes in their life, positive changes, to help reduce their emissions. Placemaking is something that's already reflected in planning and economic growth and housing strategies, but it's just, again, maximising the opportunities in that space as we transition more to community living, and making sure that those communities are as sustainable as possible, include green infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Engagement and support in the sense of offering guidance to businesses, because we feel that some smaller businesses in particular might struggle to embed their own net zero style programs. So being able to signpost them to resources that can help, loans and grants that might support investment that otherwise wouldn't happen, I think will be quite important. And then there's the big ticket items, which will be looking at the infrastructural and sectoral decarbonisation schemes, so trying to incentivise inward investment for things like renewables, for example, and sustainable housing, and across the board really just trying to encourage schemes, acting as an enabler and a facilitator to bring money into the region to decarbonise at scale, I suppose. And where we're doing that, making sure that everything is in line with green recovery aspirations and sustainable economic growth. And obviously with COVID-19 and the recession that's expected, that young people are going to be disproportionately affected in terms of employment. So creating opportunities and training that supports those opportunities, I think, is going to be absolutely critical. And then in terms of how this plan is going to evolve, I think the ecological crisis goes hand in hand with climate change. It's all about human intervention that have damaged the environment and what we can do to sort of redress that balance. So I think biodiversity will increasingly come to the fore in terms of having synergies with this program of work that we've created, And then finally, I think adaptation is also going to be critical. A lot of what's in this plan at the moment is around mitigation strategies, but the effects of climate change are going to manifest themselves in terms of more extreme weather, and we do need to adapt to those issues and become more resilient by taking appropriate action. So I think that is really what I wanted to talk to you about, because I want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. I mean, the trouble is, not only is it a big document, but as you say, it's going to have to be reviewed very frequently because of the changing nature of things. I mean, even today, I think Prince Charles has said that the COVID will be minuscule in comparison to the climate crisis. So it's a real worry, isn't it, of getting people to take notice when in fact they're worried about their jobs and so forth, and the government is saying get in your cars and drive into the city centres and get back to work. So it's a hard situation we're in at the moment. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Chair, Councillor Dagger.
Right, carry on.
Yeah, you did mention about an anaerobic digester in the district and the production of methane, and that could be possibly used, you know, for other uses. Is that currently being exhausted to atmosphere?
Glenn probably has a better answer than me to this, Councillor Dagger, so I'll let him go.
Yeah, so in response to your question, no, it's not, David. Basically, we have a waste PFI site out of South Kirby, as you know. So all the gas that's currently produced within our anaerobic digestion farm to date is actually reutilised, and we have 2 large engines on site, so we reuse it, and it is actually going back into grid at the moment. The reason we're looking at expanding that is there's an opportunity to bring in additional waste so it can increase its capacity. And we're also interested in terms of what's happening nationally in terms of being able to put green energy back into the grid. So that's why we're looking at it. And also one thing that obviously as technology's moved on since the PFI has been built, and that's something we're always looking at, is the challenge in terms of being able to use some of the AD gas for biofuels for our vehicles. It's not a very easy process, but it's something that's achievable. So I think, to answer your question, no, it's not going to atmosphere. Yes, we're using it at the moment, but what we're trying to do is be a bit more creative in terms of opportunities with that methane as such.
Okay, thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, sir.
Anybody else that wants to ask a question? I think there was a debate the other week about jobs and so forth, and I just wondered how the Preston model came into all of this.
Peter, do you want to respond?
Yeah, Glenn, I've not been involved in the Preston model previously, so you might be best to answer this one.
To be fair, Olivia, I'm not sure what you mean in terms of the Preston model.
Well, essentially it's buying locally and trying to up the economy of the local area. So you'd think it would marry into this kind of plan, wouldn't you? Because basically we want people to travel less or goods to travel less.
Sorry, obviously I won't familiar with the Preston model as such, but if one of the strands within the paper you will see, it is very much about procurement and local procurement and things like that, and that's something we're keen to do. So obviously in terms of proximity principles and things like that, it's very important for us. So I think you'll see in the report, it is actually detailed. It's quite a strong strand for us, and it's something that part of the team we're going to be working with a lot of local producers wherever possible and things.
Great, great. Any other questions? Everybody's very quiet this morning, aren't they? When we see the fires in America and the sort of flooding and whatever all over the world, it's such an important subject, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, you know, what we've tried to demonstrate with this plan, and just to reassure members online, is, you know, we put a huge amount of time and effort into it to produce a plan that's got reality attached to it. The team will be worked on each one of the strands and developing clear deliverable outcomes. So the people who are tasked to do that individually across the council will be brought to task as such by our staff. But what we've tried to do is involve them in it from the principle from the outset. So some of the things in there has already started. It's worthwhile saying is that we've got a strong relationship with NG in our partnership. So some of the things that Pete's already alluded to within the first 5 strands, some of that work is already started, so that's great. Some of the things is ambitious in terms of things like solar farms. Obviously, it's something that we're keen to explore around solar PV. We have had some preliminary meetings with members online again, which is obviously based around the OSSI principles and one at South Kirby. I know I can see Councillor Tully's online, and certainly he was sat through one of the presentations. And again, what we're trying to do as part of this moving forward is keep everybody involved in the process. Again, we want it very open. That's why we're obviously joining Scrutiny. We want people to feel they're part of it as well, and they can ask as many questions and actually offer any advice or any, anything that's new out there. And what we're seeing at the moment is it's a massive changing world. And I mean, a lot from the negativity side, and I think you're right, Olivia. Unfortunately, we keep seeing it on the news, don't we? That there's fires everywhere, and everybody saw Richard Attenborough the other night. Quite a compelling series if you watched it. Quite emotional, actually, elements of it. So I think people are getting behind the principles of climate, and what we're trying to do, we will do, is we're making it real, and we want people to be involved in it. You will see that we've put a dedicated comms person into this as well, and that person's currently doing lots of work in terms of raising its profile. There'll be lots more coming out. We're starting to put more out on Twitter. You might have noticed if anybody are on Twitter, and we will be doing things like on Facebook as well in terms of some little things that people can help and how they can improve. So you see, we're just trying to, at the moment it's an organic thing, but we're just trying to push it forward. I can see you've got a comment from Councillor Swift, Councillor Rowley.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Councillor Farmer first. Do you want to say something, Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can Glyn or Peter give an update to the committee regarding the solar farms up at Ossett and South Kirby, please?
Yeah. So, Nick, so in terms of at the moment, obviously they are quite new in its thought process. So what we're looking at is 2 sites potentially are being identified. There's one is up at Ossett, hence why we've had the briefing around it initially, and then there's one at South Kirby. Both, if we're successful, would more or less put us into a carbon neutral position in terms of our electricity demand for the district. The intention is we're not making them purely about solar. This is about making them an environmental park. So we're keen to bring something into the district that brings around awareness for kids. So we'd like to make it where kids can come along. They can learn about green energy. They can learn about the biodiversity. They can learn about things like the bees, the butterflies. We want to make them more environmental parks rather than solar parks. We want to make it in a combination of a few things. We're also looking at where possible if we can generate any additional monies that obviously contribution is given back to local communities to try and support them as well. So lots of work going on, and certainly we'd be happy to bring something back into Scrutiny when we get a little bit more detail in terms of, obviously there's a process in terms of planning and things like that we need to go through. What we try to do at the moment is just get people on the principle of what we're trying to push forward.
Thank you. Kevin? Councillor Swift.
Yes, just demuting myself, Chair. Right, I think I was taking advantage of Neville's presence to ask a question that perhaps was closer to his brief on the climate change subject. The last week at Planning Committee, we approved another of these gigantic big box projects that's related to the motorway network. This was the big Next project at Emsall, but presumably from their prospect, the important thing is that it's handy for the A1M. Now, I just wondered what Neville's thoughts were, because I don't think it's an easy question at all, of how we as a district extricate ourselves from a situation where we're setting out our stall to attract projects which relate to our advantages in terms of motorways, and which tend to be pretty difficult to access by public transport, because
Sorry,
public
Kevin.
transport.
Can I just ask you to hold that, because Neville is the next item on the agenda. And
Yeah, but it's not. It's about this. It's about this agenda item, Chair. It's not. It's not about the items that Neville's down to talk about.
All right, carry on then. Sorry.
Yeah. It's to ask if thought's being given to how we can amend our plans. I don't think it's easy, so that we're able to go back to having more employment concentrated near the town centres, which we can access by public transport, and less in the big motorway orientated big box schemes, which is what, to be honest, even the updated local plan still seems to be geared to. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. An interesting question, really, isn't it? Because we've sold ourselves frequently on the grounds that we've got such a comprehensive motorway system. Neville, are you able to answer that, or is that part of your presentation?
Thank you, Chair. I can try and answer that very briefly. My first comment really would be, though, the whole purpose of planning is to try and support sustainable development and sustainable communities, and it is closely tied to recognising challenges around climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. We have some locational advantages as a district, and they have been underpinning economic growth in the district for some time. That said, though, we are looking to see whether we can diversify the employment opportunities, looking to see whether we can encourage higher density, high quality jobs. But we do need to recognise that as we move forward to a new way of living, that the type of development that Next are bringing forward is necessary to support the move to e-retailing, e-commerce, for example. Many of us now are looking to shop online. That requires goods to be moved around the country and then distributed to individual homes. We need to repurpose town and city centres to make them more diverse and attractive places for people to spend time. They're going to be less dependent on retailing moving forward. So we need to think across the board in terms of the employment opportunities we need to create. The development at South Hempsall is within walking and cycling distance of South Hempsall, South Kirby and Moorthorpe. It's a place where there's a rail station. In fact, there's several rail stations in that locality. But equally, it is well located through the strategic road network, and until we can transition to having more goods moved around the country by rail, then the strategic road network is going to continue to be the way in which goods are moved around. Hopefully, increasingly by hydrogen fueled vehicles or electric fueled vehicles, which will start to address some of the issues that Peter talked about in terms of carbon. But it is a balance, and we are trying to make sure that we give the district the best opportunity to attract the jobs that are needed for the residents. It is something that we are taking fully account of in the new local plan that's being prepared. So I hope that provides a reasonably brief response to Councillor Swift's question.
Thank you. Is that okay, Kevin?
Thank you, Chair.
We'll be pursuing it again, no doubt. I noticed Nick wanted to make a comment, but was it just thanks, Nick?
Yeah, that's just thanks for the information that Glyn and Peter gave us. Thank you.
Yeah. Tony, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Olivia. Excellent presentation from Peter and Glenn. That was an excellent presentation. My question is about, we talked about we're talking a lot about the district level, but my question is also about what we're doing at community level. And I'll give you 2 examples in my ward. For some time now, we've had a plant was taking methane out of the coal seams because it's Castleford, which was a coal mining area. But I found out that although it's using the methane for electricity, it's also generating a lot of heat, and nothing was thought about what to do with that heat. We've also got the weir at Castleford, where private companies have wanted to put in schemes to generate electricity, but that would feed into the grid. It wasn't being used locally, and the private companies say to be honest, it's not in their interest because they won't get the money back if it was locally. So that's what my question is. As part of this, of looking at climate change, I think we also need to look down at community level, and it's just what we're doing about that, about community level.
Thanks for that, Councillor Wallace. Peter Leighton-Jones speaking. Yeah, I think it's an important one, and I think it's about engagement again. So identifying potential community-based renewable schemes, I think would be a good thing. It's just trying to understand how the ownership models would work and how those people can derive benefits from any such scheme. Because it could be the case that you might have solar on roofs and then aggregate that demand. So all of it goes into the grid, but then use that money to help subsidize people's electricity bills, for example. But it's a notoriously difficult area to go into. The domestic supply market, energy supply market, is facing a lot of difficulties at the moment. You will have seen that Robin Hood Energy, which was set up by Nottingham City Council, recently went out of business effectively and sold their customer base to British Gas, having been set up to address fuel poverty related concerns. Bristol Energy in a similar position. It's very difficult in terms of margins and so on and so forth. ENGIE withdrew from the domestic energy supply market as well. So it's just trying to create the mechanisms that would allow for those types of community-based schemes to exist and prosper. So I think there is a piece of work to do there, and it would be good to look at existing examples and how well they've worked, but also considering that a lot of the older schemes that were created benefited from much higher subsidization in terms of the feed-in tariff scheme, for example, which doesn't exist anymore. So we now live in a subsidy-free world. So you have to be a bit more creative in terms of how you create those revenue streams that are going to make such schemes work commercially. So bit of a rambling answer, Councillor Wallace, but I think what you're saying is really important, and I think we do need to engage and then try and just help those local communities to structure schemes, I suppose, by taking independent advice where necessary, and maybe helping to facilitate things like crowdfunding related initiatives to raise the capital to deliver those schemes, because I know that some communities have managed to do that previously. So we will definitely look into that as part of our engagement piece.
If I could just add, Councillor Wallace, as well, I think Pete's made a really good point, and it's something that will be challenged moving forward in terms of this ever-changing world, especially around different legislation and things. He touched on, which I want to add on, is about the FITs, so the feed-in tariffs, which is a subsidy for green energy type initiatives. Then we got the ROCs, which is the renewable energy certificates, and then we're now told that there's a new set of obligations that's coming that may be advantageous to us. And I think our challenge our way through this is going to be right in the front of the game and making sure that we're right there in terms of nationally what's changing, the changing picture, because some of these schemes can be the make or break of an economy for a scheme. So like Pete talks about, the efficiency of a scheme out will be predicated on whether they can get a good return. It's good business sense, but so certainly Pete, and that's what I'm encouraging him to do, is to get out there and see what's coming forward and whether we can be the first to strike. You know, we're watching the market in terms of hydrogen, which is an interesting market for us. Is can that be something that we could look at doing in Wakefield District and create jobs and opportunities for us? So it's a, like I say, it's a big moving feast at the moment, but we're certainly got the skills at the moment to try and get ourselves in that place to try and be almost at the front of it.
An interesting comment by Peter that we're subsidy free. I haven't noticed that lately, but obviously I've missed it. Any other questions? No, I can't. None's coming up. I think that it's going to be quite complex for us as well as a scrutiny board to keep monitoring this. I think somewhere in the many pages that have been sent to us, it says if the world's collective response is too slow, or the modelled effect of climate change comes sooner than scientists expect, how will we adapt? And the Council needs to develop its approach to climate change adaptation, as mitigation alone will not be enough. Some of the impacts from climate change will be unavoidable, which means that this programme will need to link into other areas of the Council's work, such as emergency planning to help deal with emergency situations from increased flooding, heat waves and so on. So it's going to be very complex to keep looking at it, isn't it, and seeing all those changes that are taking place. I think, for example, the forests of South America are still a tremendous worry as they diminish rapidly.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we move on and thank our presenters? No. Can I thank you both for presenting this morning? And as I said, a complex area, and we look forward to hearing another update at the next meeting. Thank you.
Olivia, can I just clarify the issue in terms of COVID? Is there anything more information you want from me?
I'm not sure if anybody else has any other comments. I mean, basically, at the moment, we're in a situation where we would actually like less transport or less private transport, and yet what we actually see on our roads is they're getting busier and people are being encouraged to stay off public transport. So, and I'm not sure, maybe we'll have some sort of update, or Kevin can give an update in terms of what's happening on a West Yorkshire level in terms of transport subsidy, because public transport is being underused. But that will be something that we'll look at in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you too. Thanks.
Can we now move on and welcome, I'm not sure who we're welcoming actually. Obviously Neville, the Service Manager, Planning and Transportation Policy, and Morgan Stringer, the team leader. I'm not sure if Bronwyn Knight is here, is she?
I am, Councillor Rowley, yes.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. Another new face, new Service Director for Planning and Transportation. Very welcome.
Thank you.
You've all been invited to discuss how the Council can influence future house building through planning policy in order to improve energy efficiency, reduce CO2 emissions and provide healthy, affordable homes for residents. So I think Neville is going to give a PowerPoint presentation.
That's right, Chair. Just bear with me one moment while I share my screen. Hopefully you can now see a slide on the screen in front of you.
Yeah.
Right, good morning everybody. As I've already mentioned, one of the key purposes of planning is to support sustainable development, sustainable communities, and do so in the context of the challenges around climate change. But this morning we've been asked to set out how planning can particularly help in the relation to building new homes in the future. So this morning I just want to very briefly take you through a presentation to set the context and give you some indication of the way that planning can do that. So as most of you probably appreciate, many forms of development do require planning consent. Development is defined in the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, and you can see on the slide what that definition is, but it's the carrying out of building, engineering, mining, or other operations in, on, over, or under land, or making a material change of use to buildings or land. And the requirement then through the other planning legislation is that applications for planning permission should be determined in accordance with a development plan, which is a statutory plan put in place by local authorities such as Wakefield. We need to work within the context of national planning policy and guidance. That's set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. It is set out by government. It applies to England. It sets out a framework for preparing local plans, which include provision for housing and other forms of development. And it also identifies the framework for development management, that is determining planning application. Government has provided a detailed set of practice guidance covering a whole series of issues. It is prescriptive, but it does cover issues such as housing, climate change, flood risk, and so on. And as I said, the purpose of the planning system is to contribute to the achievement of sustainable social, environmental, and economic development and address climate change. It's part of the solution to climate change. Planning, though, can only impact on new development. So as you heard from Peter earlier on this morning, there is a big challenge, and actually it's a challenge about the way we behave, the way we carry out our activities, but also how we're going to adapt the existing development and buildings across the country. The planning has its part to play, but it's through influencing new development. Wakefield is well placed. It has an up-to-date planning framework in place, and it consists of a whole series of documents that have been put in place since 2009, and you can see those highlighted on the screen in front of you. There are a number of development plan documents, which are the documents that have policies in that are used to determine planning applications. And there are then some supplementary planning documents which provide further guidance to assist that process. Within those documents, there are some key policies that are relevant to the question we've been asked to consider this morning. And they are set out in the adopted plan at the moment in terms of being in two documents. One is the core strategy document, and the other document being development policies document. So there are policies that deal with housing mix, affordability and quality, policies that deal with design, safety and environmental quality. And CS13, the third one listed there under the core strategy, actually deals with mitigating and adapting to climate change and seeks to get efficient use of resources. Development policies are slightly more detailed, and they are often used to help determine planning applications. And there are policies, such as those listed in front of you, that deal with the design of new development, policies that require renewable energy, part of new development, and the policies that deal with making sure that new buildings are constructed in a sustainable way and make efficient use of resources. Council's in the process of preparing a new local plan to replace the local development framework, and we will be shortly consulting on a publication draft version of that plan starting on the 29th of October before submitting the document for independent examination by a government planning inspector next year. We've taken the opportunity to look again at some of the policies and to improve them in terms of ensuring that they help secure the type of development that's needed in the district, the type of development that elected members are keen to see, but also policies are reinforcing the need to deal with sustainable issues and climate-related issues as well. So the policy around housing mix, affordability and quality has been updated. There are now, excuse me, specific policies dealing with some matters that weren't dealt with before. You'll see that the first three listed there are broadly updates of existing policies, but the fourth policy listed, WLP3, we're now looking to set minimum space standards for new homes. Some of the homes that have been built in Yorkshire in recent years have got the smallest room sizes in the country. Now, that's not acceptable, really, in terms of what residents living in Wakefield should expect. So we're looking to set minimum space standards. We need to do this through the local plan so that they can have that can be used to determine plan applications. WLP 30 is looking to reinforce the message around the need for renewable energy to be provided as part of development. And we've heard this morning that some of that can be things like photovoltaic cells on roofs. We've heard about different types of ways energy can be generated, including from recycling waste. WLP 31 is an update of the current policy. WLP 32, looking to make sure that electric vehicle charging infrastructure is provided in all new development, and that applies to individual developments for new homes as well as commercial uses. I'm looking to see where we can to encourage the delivery of district heating and cooling infrastructure as part of major new developments. So we have a planning policy context, but all development that requires planning permission needs to be dealt with through the development management process. So the role of development management is to determine plan applications and plan notifications in line with the national and local planning policy. It allows the council to put in place planning conditions so we can make sure there are appropriate conditions in place, and it can deal with some of the issues that you've asked us about this morning. So we can have conditions on relating to vehicle charging point, renewable energy, and also a reduction in carbon emissions. At the moment, there's a mechanism to secure contributions from new development through Section 106 agreements, and that is used often to make sure we can secure affordable housing, but also to make sure that we secure contributions to sustainable transport. So we require developers to prepare travel plans. We set out the interventions and incentives for people to use public transport, for example. Development management also has the role of making sure that the conditions attached to planning consents are properly discharged, and also for monitoring planning obligations to make sure that we do secure the contributions that are required, and that those contributions are then spent on the appropriate associated infrastructure. And we're specifically now looking to accelerate the growth of sites that have planning consent that are stalled and therefore not delivering housing as we would anticipate. So we're moving towards trying to make sure that housing delivery is speeded up through that process. I mentioned at the outset of the presentation that many forms of development require planning consent, but not all forms of development do require planning consent, and the government has increasingly been amending the planning system to indicate that more forms of development are deemed permitted development, which means that they don't necessarily need planning consent to take place. There are examples of where that relates to housing. So changes of use from some office development to residential use no longer requires planning consent. Excuse me, and smaller houses in multiple occupation also don't require planning consent to change between individual houses and housing occupation. Excuse me. The council also cannot control standards or impose conditions. Sorry, the council cannot control standards or impose conditions on these types of developments. So it means we can't have the impact we'd like to in terms of design, energy efficiency, or affordable housing and sustainable transport. Building control also has an important role to play, and building control primarily deals with the fabric of the buildings themselves rather than the use, and it's achieved through building regulations and the Building Act 1984. The local authority is the statutory building control authority for enforcing building regulations, but the council doesn't and isn't the only body that can approve building regulations. So we have inspectors that operate in the private sector that have a similar role in terms of approving building regulations. There's a set of approved documents that set out in great detail how the regulations can be met, and there are documents that relate to the various elements of building construction. Approved document L deals with the conservation of fuel and power. So that allows the council to try and make sure that buildings are efficient as possible in terms of the use of fuel and power. Separate document allows the building regulations to influence the fabric of the building. So in order to make sure that in the first place the buildings are constructed in the most sustainable way, and over time, in terms of meeting the challenge around climate, the expectation is the building regulations will be enhanced moving forward so that we can move towards sort of carbon neutral building. Government has a very important role to play here because government is responsible for the national standards for planning and building regulations. So it has to play its full part in addressing the issues around climate change and improving the quality and sustainability of new homes. Recently, government's been consulting on some potential changes. So in 2019, 2020, I've just mentioned it was looking to improve the building regulations and specifically Part L, so to move incrementally towards zero carbon. We expect some changes later this year to the building regulations, and government's introducing a future home standard in 2025. The government's also consulting on a reform to the planning system, and that is also setting out changes in terms of what it expects for new homes. So looking to produce 75 to 80% lower carbon dioxide emissions compared to current levels from 2025. Homes are intended to be zero carbon ready rather than actually zero carbon homes. And primarily that will take account of the decarbonising the electricity grid system, which we heard a little bit about earlier on this morning. So the intention is that new homes should not need costly retrofitting. in order to be net zero carbon by 2050. The big challenge will be that 99% of the homes that will be around in 100 years are already here. So retrofitting of existing housing stock is going to be a crucial way in which we can start moving towards the net zero carbon homes. We expect that future reforms will actually strengthen further the building regulations, but it's also going to be removing the need for local policies and negotiations with developers. So that may well be something that elected members have concern about and a view upon, that the government is consulting on, in effect, having a set of national development management policies to deal with planning applications. So finally, planning does have an important role in terms of climate change agenda, specifically around the challenges around making and improving our housing, making housing more sustainable. So we think planning has a central role in delivering high quality sustainable development, which should help us address climate change, deliver affordable housing, amongst other matters. Planning is very important in directing development to sustainable location. In part, Councillor Swift was posing a question about this earlier on this morning. Planning does provide the opportunity to make sure we get development of the right type in the right place, which should minimise the need for people to travel to meet most of their needs, but also to make use of transport infrastructure such as rail network and public transport services. Planning does have sustainable development and placemaking at its heart. That is the purpose of planning. However, as I mentioned before, we can only influence through planning development that needs to be consented, in other words, planning that needs planning consent. That's a very quick run through how planning can fit with the question you posed us. It's by way of setting the context for potentially further discussions at future scrutiny committees around maybe some of the detail behind the general set of policies that I've set out. Quite happy to answer any questions you or others have.
Thank you, Neville. I'm sort of a bit puzzled because on my agenda it says, in order to improve energy efficiency, reduce CO2 emissions and provide healthy, affordable homes for residents. But in fact, what we're often doing is producing houses for would-be residents who necessarily don't live in this area simply because their wages are higher and our house prices are lower. But our local people can't necessarily afford them, can they?
I'll just stop presenting. That's helpful. Well, we do have policy in place, and we are trying to make sure that development secures affordable housing. It is true in recent years, because Wakefield has had land available for development, that a number of people have chosen to live in Wakefield from neighbouring districts where there's been less land available. But the building regulations apply to all changes to houses. So houses that are extended, that existing residents are living in, there's an opportunity to influence those. Similarly, if the extensions to those properties require planning consent as well, then there's an opportunity through the planning policies to influence.
I mean, essentially what it does is ensure that we've got commuters, so that increases the CO2 emissions, doesn't it? I'm equally concerned about the way that businesses can be transferred into housing and houses in multiple occupation can be changed. I mean, basically what we've found, certainly in my ward, is an awful lot of housing that's really substandard and crowded. And when you look at the COVID situation, what people need is space, not to be further enclosed. I'm just concerned that you could have, as we've seen in other parts of the country, windowless flats and so forth, or bedsit, simply because there's no legislation to control it. It's quite worrying.
Well, I think as officers, we're also concerned about some of these changes that government's introduced in terms of permitted development and the ability, for example, to change office development and industrial buildings into residential properties. It is an issue that is a much bigger problem elsewhere, but nonetheless, I think we can anticipate that there will be developers wanting to take advantage of what they're able to do in Wakefield district. But because they don't need planning consent, there's little we can do through the planning regime. They will still need building regulation approval, so we will still be able to influence the nature of those developments through the building regulations.
So essentially we need more building enforcers.
Well, we need to continue to deal with building regulation applications. You will appreciate, though, from what I said earlier on, that it isn't just the council that can approve building regulation applications. I suppose it would be really good if we can encourage more developers to use the local authority building control services. It is the high quality service. So all of us, if we can, should try and influence developers to take the opportunity to use the council's building control service. That gives us the best way of implementing the development.
Yeah. I'll move on to Nick. Do you want to make a comment or question?
No, thank you, Chair. No, my question was answered later on in his presentation. Thank you.
Right. Dave, Councillor Dagger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Neville.
Morning.
You mentioned WLP 34 district heating and cooling schemes, and I know some local authorities have looked at or gone down the road of combined heat and power plants, CHPs. Is this something that our local authority is considering?
There have been some initial studies about district heating systems, both in Wakefield City and in Castleford. I'm not sure they're being progressed at the present time because there are challenges around viability and cost. We are reinforcing our planning policy to try and encourage private developers to take these sorts of considerations into account. But it is something that Glyn and Peter may well want to pick up as part of the broader climate change agenda to see whether we can actually bring some of these forward. We have looked at opportunities in the centre of Wakefield by connecting public sector buildings, for example. And in Castleford, we were looking at opportunities in terms of the areas of development for new housing along the river corridor. It potentially could be something that might be considered in the significant urban expansion of Nottingley, where we're looking to deliver a significant number of new homes. Morgan, I don't know whether there's anything you might be able to add. I think you have been involved in some of these discussions previously.
I think that's right. I wasn't aware of any new specific schemes being considered at the moment. I think it is just a policy where we would like to encourage this to be considered through new development. But I noticed Peter's put a comment on there, and I think through conversations with Mark Hooton, I think there may be something else being considered in the pipeline. So I don't know if Peter might want to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think there were about 4 different schemes that were being looked at in terms of feasibility. So there was one in the city centre, but it was based on combined heat and power plant that was fed by natural gas. So the decarbonisation credentials were pretty much non-existent. It wouldn't have equated to any carbon savings. A few years ago, that could have been something that would be considered, but now in the context of our net zero work, it would be a hard sell, really. The City Field site, I think there was an idea to maybe create an energy centre that would help feed the hospital in the vicinity and some of the housing development. But I think a lot of housing has already been developed, which would mean that the business case will have been diminished for that. And then I think there were 2 additional schemes, one in Pontefract and one in Nottingley. I think the first was looking at a water source heat pump tied to the river, which when you looked at the financials associated with that, the returns were pretty much non-existent, and it relied on subsidy, which has now pretty much disappeared, to be honest. So I don't think that would be viable. And the one in Nottingley, again, the financials didn't stack up. And I think it's mainly low density housing, which meant that you wouldn't have as much of an outlet for that type of scheme unless new development would make that viable in the future. But what we'd like to look at, but this is very, very early stages, is wastewater heat from old mine shafts associated with the coal industry. Because it would make sense from a circular economy perspective to create a residual use for that old industry, given the fact that obviously it had a severe economic impact on this area and you were finding a new life for that former industry, if you like. And I know there are lots of old mine shafts around this district, so it's about investigating the potential in that regard. And working with partners to see what opportunities exist. But like I said, it's very early stages at the moment, but that is one project that we want to initiate. Thank you.
I think Kevin is next. Councillor Swift.
It's okay, Chair. I'm just actually typing out a short response to your question earlier on over the impact of COVID on public transport services. So it'll just be there as a text. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tully.
Yeah, it was just interesting to what Neville said about local engagement with no housing development, because I'm sick to the back teeth of developers muscle into my ward, and any bit of land they can find as an authority, we flog it off to them without anybody having a say locally. And I've got one prime example in Westfield Lane at the moment, where we'd earmarked some land up there for some open space, some sport development, one thing or another, and all of a sudden now, you know, there's a planning application going in for 34 more houses on Westfield Lane, and I find it quite annoying to guys. And on the other one, regarding the building regulations, I live in Wakefield, which done, well, good luck, because if these builders will want to keep using properties for multi-occupancy, they ain't going to come to Wakefield Council for building regulations or building regulatory officers to look at what they're doing, because in most cases they're doing it because they don't want us to know what they're doing.
Yes, a real worry, isn't it? Can I just ask, I mean, you made some reference earlier on to the fact that we've got the smallest rooms in the country, in Yorkshire. I mean, is that because we haven't specified in our planning applications that we actually want a decent sized room for our residents? Have we missed something?
Well, no. It's, as you would appreciate, most new housing development happens through the private sector. Those companies have decided that because of viability issues in part, that they can only offer to the market homes that have smaller room sizes than they might offer elsewhere. They argue that it reflects what people want, but we now do have the opportunity to specify some room standards, but you need to do that through the local plan. So we've now taken that opportunity. We had hoped that the government would introduce national housing standards and room sizes. They haven't done that. I think it was in London that the Greater London Council initially started to think about developing standards for appropriate room sizes. So we are now taking the opportunity to, through the new local plan, to get those standards, and we're looking to adopt the national ones. We need evidence, which we've been collecting, to demonstrate that we think some of the room sizes in the new homes are inadequate, and we will find out whether we can adopt these new standards in the local plan through the examination process next year, but we're looking to try and take that forward.
So it's all quite alarming, really. We've got small rooms in small houses. We've got houses in multiple occupation that people can do whatever they want with. And we've got companies that, if they go to the wall, may well consider transferring to private housing, and we'll have no say in it. It's all, it's quite alarming, isn't it?
Well, the room size issue isn't just an issue affecting Wakefield, it's affecting other authorities across the north, and they're also looking to introduce minimum standards. I mean, people are buying new homes. They obviously think the new homes are appropriate. They wouldn't buy them if they didn't think they were providing the sort of accommodation they want. But that said, there's a limited choice for people. People need to look at generally the existing housing stock if they want properties with large rooms. There are controls on homes in multiple occupation as well. Any home in multiple occupation with 5 or more tenants has to be licensed by the local authority. The change of use applies to small homes in multiple occupation as well, up to 6 people sharing the property. Properties where there are more people in do require a separate planning consent. So there are some controls, and separately the council, as you'll be aware, Councillor Rowley is working with landlords to try and get them accredited as a good landlord scheme, and we are seeing, as a result of some interventions by the council in those areas under stress, that there are improvements being made. But yes, you're right, there are some rogue landlords, and they're really the ones causing the problems, and some of the tenants also are not necessarily have the same tradition. People traditionally living in these areas, they've got different cultures, different approaches, but we do have the opportunity through other mechanisms as well to deal with issues around the around fly tipping, for example, or noise and litter and so on. So there are ways of trying to mitigate the impact that some of this can have on local communities.
I think the worry for me is that the poorest people often live in privately rented accommodation, which is not well insulated and costs a lot to heat if it's heated at all. And I think that's something that we need to look at, is people's desperation, particularly as the winter approaches, just to keep warm. Yes. Any other comments, questions? No, I note that Councillor Dagger's leaving this meeting, or has left it. Thank you, David. Any other comments from anybody?
Could I just say that the council has other programmes as well, where it's seeking to try and address the point you've just made there, Councillor Rowley, around fuel poverty and insulation of private and rented properties. So it is a relatively small programme, but it is a programme that's developing, and no doubt will develop further in the context of the climate change agenda.
Yeah, I think it's getting tenants to complain, isn't it, and landlords to take it as a serious item, which in the long term may well save everybody money. Thank you. Can we move on to item 8 on the agenda, which is the South Featherstone Link Road and the Nottingley Southern Relief Road update? And again, I think it's Neville. You're getting plenty of coverage this morning, Neville.
Thank you. I haven't got a presentation this morning, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to give you a brief update about these two particular highway schemes by way of a factual update. I would sort of preface my comments by saying that clearly there are concerns around whether you should be building new highways in the context of climate change. But it is important that we are able to address the concerns of residents and businesses, and that overall what we're trying to do is promote a sustainable way for people to travel. The two schemes I've been asked to just provide an update. The first one is the South Featherstone Link Road. Now this is a series of separate links that are looking to relieve traffic conditions in Featherstone, Pontefract and Ackworth, with the intention of trying to address issues around traffic congestion, poor air quality and noise in those three places, and provide an opportunity for traffic to have an alternative way around those three places. The status of the scheme is that a safeguard alignment is shown in the council's development plan. A strategic outline business case has been approved by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and that was in October 2019. The council is currently looking to develop an outline business case for this network of new roads. However, there's a long way to go before any decisions taken as to what this road might look like, how it's designed, and there will be opportunities for consultation with elected members, with members of the public. We do fully appreciate that this scheme needs to be considered in the context of the new challenges around climate change and the need to encourage people to travel more sustainably. So this means that we need to be looking at how we might be able to improve conditions within those three places for people to be able to walk and cycle and use public transport by moving the private vehicle trips out of those centres and giving people the opportunity to travel around them. But these schemes are not designed to be supporting an increase in private car trips, but an opportunity to try and enable us to do something that they can improve the environment and enable people to travel more actively and sustainably within those centres. This road may provide opportunities for new public transport services, for example, from the southeast of the district to Normanton, which at the moment is very, very difficult, if at all possible, because of the need to travel through the various places. In terms of the timeline, we will be looking potentially to have an outline business case towards the end of 2022, and should the scheme be approved and funding be available, then construction might start after 2025. So this is not a scheme that's going to be happening anytime soon.
Any comments, questions on that?
I'll move on to the...
I'd say from a personal point of view that sort of, you know, the argument for detouring traffic away from Doncaster Road meant that in fact Agrig Road, which is a much poorer community, is inundated with traffic, and likewise with the building of Marsh Way resulted in, I think, undue use of North Avenue, but that's just in my ward alone. So I think we need to look at what the repercussions are for other communities when these roads are built. Any comments, questions? No. I'm assuming silence is that sort of, we will look at it again as it progresses if it's going to be a few years away.
Should I then provide a brief update about the second scheme?
Right.
Second scheme, Nottingham Southern Link Road. This is a scheme intended to provide a relief road to the south of Nottingham, and it is associated with the council's ambition around regenerating Nottingham and encouraging more employment and housing development on the southern side of Nottingham. Now, again, like the other road, it needs to address various issues. First of all, there are currently significant traffic issues through the centre of Nottingham, and there are businesses that use heavy goods vehicles, and they also currently travel through Nottingham. So this road potentially provides an opportunity for those heavy goods vehicles to be taken out of much of Nottingham and travel in and out from the southern side, therefore avoiding travelling close to where people live. Its status, again, it's an indicative route is shown in the emerging local plan and also in the Nottingham Master Plan. I think the Nottingham Master Plan is currently out for consultation with the public, or very shortly will be. We've engaged some consultants to try and do some further work on the scheme and some initial design work on the scheme to see what benefits it can deliver. It is at an even earlier stage than the other scheme I mentioned, so we haven't yet prepared a strategic outline case for this scheme. In terms of consultation, as I say, the consultation on the master plan is underway, and there'll be an opportunity for elected members and the public to give their views about the master plan and, as part of that, the highway scheme. We are expecting to get the results from the consultants' work probably in November this year, and that will be part of the evidence that will be put forward with the local plan through the examination process next year. But it is a scheme that's crucial to being able to develop not only in the way that elected members want to do. Its location is constrained because of the geography of Nottingham, with the river to the north and the M62 to the south. So there is a fairly limited location for this road. But it is, again, like the other road, hopefully to provide an opportunity to encourage people to travel more sustainably as well. So both these roads would have cycleways along them and footways, and there will be various intersections created where cycleways can also connect to these roads. So they are not designed entirely for private vehicles. They're likely to be single carriageway roads, and they will be fitted into the environment as best as they can be. So two schemes, fairly early in terms of their design and consultation on them. Does Anyone have any questions?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you'd stopped, finished or
Sorry.
not. Right, Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great, fantastic. No, in terms of the Nottingley road, my main concern is just in terms of time span, because I know when we keep talking about the local area master plan and regeneration, the concerns is that basically everything to the north of that road will then be filled in with housing. My concern is if that road is not done before the housing, we'll just be adding additional stresses to the traffic issues already in the town centre. So I didn't know if there's anything that you could sort of add on that really, or give sort of a steer on.
Yes, we would anticipate that the one option is the roads built in phases to align with the development that's taking place, and we would expect the development to be part funding the road. But at this stage, we're collecting the evidence to see whether a case can be made for public sector money to be used through a successor to the West Yorkshire Transport Fund. So at this stage, we're trying to work through the detail of how and when the road will be provided. But the intention certainly would not be to grant planning consent for significant development that will be dependent on the road until the road's in place. But what we will try and do, I think, is try and phase the delivery of the road with the ability of the development to come forward. You will, well, hopefully you've seen the master plan. It is very much about creating residential neighbourhoods with lots of green and blue infrastructure and lots of opportunity for people to walk and cycle.
Thank you. Councillor Stokes.
Thank you, Olivia. Very similar to Tom Gordon, really. When the master plan proposal came out, I sent an email expressing concern about the lack of infrastructure within the proposal for housing, for medical facilities and education facilities. I realise it's going to be a development over a long period of time, so they need to be continually reassessed as it goes along. I noticed that in your local plan and policies presentation there were no mention of infrastructure for things like health and education, and the reply that I got to my email that I sent in indicated that the council's preparing an infrastructure study which includes support infrastructure such as health and education provision as part of the new local plan process, although it's in the early days, and it identifies deficiencies to determine the new infrastructure needed to support planned growth within the district. So I just wondered how confident can we be that the infrastructure will be in place in tandem with the development taking place. So I also note that it's not the council's responsibility to provide education facilities anymore. So I just wondered, is everything going to be in place when it...
Well, you're quite right. As part of the local plan, we do need to consider and make provision for the infrastructure that needs to support new development. And you mentioned we're preparing an infrastructure plan. Morgan might want to just comment on that in a moment or two, but we will do what we can to make provision for that infrastructure. Some of that infrastructure will be delivered through the development itself, and planning consent will be conditioned to ensure that infrastructure is provided. The council has an infrastructure levy in place, which means that contributions are made from forms of development to support the delivery of the infrastructure. The master plan does address a wide range of issues, including the infrastructure that's needed, and bringing the plan to fruition will require partnership working with a number of other organisations and agencies to make sure that the appropriate infrastructure is provided. The council is obviously very involved with and will need to oversee the delivery of the transport infrastructure, in particular the road that we've referred to. But Councillor Stokes, as you said, some of the delivery, such as doctor surgeries and so on, is something we can seek to influence through the clinical commissioning group. But it is a decision that needs to be taken by practitioners to see whether they are able to expand their services or introduce new services. Morgan, do you just want to say where we've got to with the infrastructure work?
Yeah, so as part of the local plan consultation process, obviously we consult with internal colleagues who are responsible for delivering certain types of infrastructure, so education is one example. And also we consult with external organisations that are responsible for infrastructure, so such as the Highways Agency, Environment Agency, people like that. And they have a look at the scale of growth that we're looking for in the local plan, and they will provide comments back to us about what their development plans are in terms of the infrastructure they're delivering. In terms of education, we have had some quite detailed consultation with them, so we've provided them with specific numbers in relation to sites, and they've looked at that in terms of their school place planning method that they use. And they've provided us with information about where the pressure points might be, and through that process we can write that into the local plan to see where developer contributions might be required, or where new schools might be required, for instance. So we've done quite a lot of the consultation work on that already, and we're in the process of pulling that report together, and we're hoping to have that available as part of the consultation that we'll be issuing with the local plan in October.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gordon, do you want to come back?
Yeah, it was just in terms of one of the things that was kept in reference is a consultation on the master plan which is underway, and it was just sort of in terms of I've already had over weekend more residents get in touch and just sort of ask queries and questions about the accessibility. So I've got an older lady who lives in one of the farms just off the top of there, right near where the new proposed road is going to be going. She doesn't use the internet, and she's not going to be able to actually have a look at the plan. So I was just wondering what more can be done really to make sure that everyone's aware of the proposed developments. If we're going to be going ahead with massive changes to infrastructure like this that are potentially running parallel to people's properties, and they don't have an opportunity to comment because we can't do public consultations due to COVID, how do we sort of square that circle for residents who are going to be otherwise disenfranchised through this process?
I think if you could, if you're able to draw that particular case to the attention of Dave Hazard, who's council officer responsible for overseeing the engagement on the master plan, we might better see whether there's something we can do, because I think we are offering the opportunity for a face-to-face contact with people if that's the only way in which they feel able to be able to comment. What the council's not able to do at the moment, though, as you would appreciate, is hold like public meetings. But if, in the case of an individual person, if that's the only way they feel able to make a comment, then, as I say, mention it to David Hazard, and we'll see what we might be able to do.
Sounds as if Mr. Hazard might be a very busy man now, because it's not only this development, is it? Any other questions? No? Well, can I thank you very much, Neville, and no doubt you will be back to talk to us again. Thanks very much indeed, and your colleagues.
Yes, I'd be pleased to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we move on to the work programme, which is item 9. There's 4 further meetings of this in this municipal year, and the committee's work programme should take account of the committee's terms of reference, which are on page 87. I know there's oddities in the way the papers are numbered, but anyway, page 87 near the back is the terms of reference. And then there's a draft programme which we've put together on page 89. And it includes climate change action plan as a standing item on all meetings, which I think is vital and very important. And the work programme is a live document and can be amended as time goes on in order to be flexible and responsive to changing circumstances. So I think what we need to do is just have this outline and then acknowledge that we may well want to make changes in the future, if that's agreeable to everybody. Any other suggestions that you want to put down now are welcome. And then we move on to, I'm assuming that there's no comments, I keep looking. The executive leader's forward plan, which is on page 91. There's 11 key decisions listed that are relevant to the committee, 5 of which have since been agreed at last week's cabinet. It's proposed to consider some of the remaining issues, such as flood risk management and air quality at future meetings. And I don't know about you, but I saw a report this week about sort of how polluted our rivers are, and I was equally concerned about that. I think we just need to be aware of them and see how we can incorporate them into our future agendas. And of course, there's the monies that were set aside at the last cabinet meeting for Thorns Park, and again, it would be nice to have an update on that. I'm not sure if it's pertinent to this committee or the other scrutiny committees, Lynn. And then finally, the date of the next meeting is the 2nd of November at 10 o'clock, and it will be held remotely, unfortunately. Are there any other comments anybody wants to make? I'm assuming silence means that you're agreeable. Can I thank you all for your attendance this morning and the officers and their support, and hope we meet again before too long. Stay safe and thank you again. Thanks. Bye.